listening to the Critical Mass Radio Show, Orange County's business talk show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. You are listening to the Critical Mass Radio Show, Orange County's business talk show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. With your host, Richard Franzi.
And welcome to this edition of Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast. I am your host, Richard Franzi, and this podcast is episode number 1150. In a postmodern world where each person's reality is shaped by social class, gender identity, culture, and lifestyle choices, many categories are no longer relevant. So how can marketers understand the new consumer? Dr. Michael Sullivan goes over how to break down the walls and liberate the postmodern consumer in his book. Are you ready for this? Marketers, Tear Down These Walls, Liberating the Postmodern Consumer. Dr. Sullivan, welcome to Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me.
Well, I'm excited to talk about the content in your book. It's a provocative title, and why don't before we get into the content, share with our audience the inspiration that brought you to the point where you decided to write this book.
Well, Richard, I've been studying consumer behavior for a really long time. I'm a professor of marketing, and I work with a lot of companies on marketing strategies. And what I've realized over the last few years is that consumers are really changing, and most companies just aren't keeping up with those changes. There's just a tremendous amount of upheaval going on, a lot of disruptions that we always talk about, and basically a disconnect between what consumers are doing, how they're interacting with companies, and what companies are doing in return. And in particular, I think consumers today are much more proactive than they used to be. So they're not the passive recipients of marketing messages that they were even 5 or 10 years ago. And so I wrote the book to explore how some of the very basic assumptions that we make about consumers and the tidy little walls we put them behind really are no longer relevant.
I'm always interested in having authors on who are also academics, because you're seeing this, first of all, maybe in your classroom. You have this crucible, this petri dish in some ways, of looking at new consumers. Did your interactions with your students at all influence your decision to study and write this book?
Oh, absolutely. If you think it's easy to walk into a room full of 18-year-olds and get their attention and keep it for an hour and a half, it's quite a challenge. And they are the epitome of the new consumer, of course, because they're constantly distracted, constantly on their phones, posting on Facebook, etc. And so, as an educator, I face the same challenge that a lot of businesses do, which is how do I get the attention of these jaded and distracted people and really get them revved up about what I'm trying to sell them.
And it's not just, and we're talking with Dr. Michael Sullivan, we're talking about his book, Marketers, Tear Down These Walls. It's not just that cohort, but it's also bled into the older cohorts up to and including, I would think, baby boomers are much more informed now. And so I wanted to ask you, I know that in your book, you're an advocate of lifestyle marketing. And I'm wondering, how traditional marketing has had to adapt, and if you could maybe start by explaining what you mean by the term lifestyle marketing.
Sure. Basically, lifestyle marketing means that you don't just think about people in terms of very basic categories that we're used to using, like male or female, young or old, rich or poor, but you really do a deeper dive and look at how they use all the different brands around them, products and services, to literally define who they are. We have all these sayings: you are what you buy, you are what you drive, you are what you eat, etc. And there's a lot of truth to that. People really use brands today very proactively. They put a lot of stock in the brands that they do choose, because those brands say a lot about their identities, and they not only tell them who they are or help to guide their own process of deciding who they are, but they also determine the other people that they want to affiliate with. And so really brands have become the new vocabulary that people use to define themselves. So lifestyle marketing is basically identifying groups of people who share an affinity for different activities, and it can be traditional psychographic type stuff that we've been doing for a long time, like political affiliation, religion, and so on. But also a lot more activity-based, like musical preferences, how you spend your leisure time, and so on. And and again, it's just a much more proactive way to look at how everyday people are picking and choosing from among all the many thousands of brands that are out there to each of them kind of try to paint their own personal portrait.
So I'm wondering, as you're answering that question, is there a correlation between your research into lifestyle marketing and this assumption or belief that the millennial generation prefers experiences over things? Is there a bleeding between those two, or am I out on a limb that doesn't connect?
Oh no, you've made a good connection, and it's not that young people don't value brands. They definitely do, but again, it's that word proactive. I keep repeating that, but what they're doing is they're taking those experiences that are out there. They're taking products and they're turning them into experiences, and each of them is a unique experience. So they're really interested in how they can weave together a unique combination of brands that really help them to define their own unique identity and find their way in the world. So I think that's absolutely a great connection to make.
We're talking with Dr. Michael Sullivan. We're talking about his book, Marketers, Tear Down These Walls. So your first conversation, I heard a lot about consumer products. So is it safe to say the marketing research that you've done, it's in the title, Liberating the Postmodern Consumer, you're really looking at B2C type sales and not necessarily B2B sales?
No. I think certainly B2C is very relevant, but the changes that we're seeing are really disrupting every kind of business, and definitely including B2B. So, for example, you mentioned this focus on experiences. When you look in a B2B context and you look at what people are trying to get out of trade shows, for example, or sales interactions, those are changing as well, and it's much more experience-oriented and not just, exchanging information and business cards. It's all about the networking. It's all about tearing down, walls that prohibit suppliers and buyers from really connecting with each other. So, no, it's definitely not just confined to B2C, though obviously, many of the products that are B2C products, clothing, automotive, and so on, are, they're definitely being disrupted.
Excellent. I'm enjoying this conversation. We're about halfway through the interview here on Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast with Dr. Michael Sullivan. We're focused on his book, Marketers, Tear Down These Walls. I'm wondering, as you say, tear down these walls, I wanted to ask you about what are you seeing, let's move back to B2C space, at least in the retail arena. What are you seeing happening to traditional retailing as it's related to this move in marketing?
Well, it's funny. A lot of people have written the obituary for traditional retail, and I think that's really premature. If you look at, obviously we're seeing a huge shakeout because, again, we'll go back to that word experience. The successful retailers are the ones who understand that in order to compete with the Amazons of the world, their advantage is that they can provide a unique experience. So the store is not just a place to warehouse your product, because you can never compete on a price basis with Amazon.
Right.
But what you can do is offer a value added in the form of an experience. So if we've had a lot of retailers fold in the last few years, but the ones that are surviving are, I think, stronger than ever, because they are revamping and understanding that the in-store experience is really, really valuable. And and if you look at the if you look at the financial activity and that's going on right now, there's a lot of healthy retailing. But again, the dead wood is definitely going to be gone.
One could almost argue that the retail experience, I've already used the word, is trending to more of an experience-based site than a shopping mall. Do you see that in your research as well?
No, absolutely. I mean, and again, that's the competitive advantage, because you can't get that kind of experience on a website usually. So if you look at, let's take a store like REI. They've done a tremendous job of really taking that outdoor experience, and showing people how to use the products in real world settings. I believe they recently appointed in the C-suite an experience officer. With that title. So, they're taking customers out on camping trips led by their store associates, of course, using products that are sold in the store. So that's the kind of model that retailers in any category can emulate. Obviously, depending on what they sell, it would be a very different experience. But people really want that. And millennials, by the way, love to shop in stores. But they have to be, again, they can't just be warehouses. They have to be places where they're going to be stimulated and entertained.
I wonder, I'm going to go off script a little bit here, and I'm talking with and interviewing Dr. Michael Sullivan. He is the author of Marketers Tear Down These Walls. And before it's all over, I'm going to ask you to share the inspiration for that title, but not just yet. I'm wondering if in history, if there are any parallels to the way that products were sold and marketed in the past. Is what's new old again, Dr. Solomon, or is this a new phenomenon based on technology and buying habits?
When you've been studying this kind of stuff as long as I have, you realize there's nothing new under the sun. So I think that's a great question. And if you look back at when department stores were first came on the scene back in the late 1800s, and you look at some of the really grand department stores in New York and Chicago and so on, they did exactly what these successful retailers now are doing. They provided experiences. They provided a merry-go-round inside the store, or a skating rink or something like that. And of course, over the years, they most of them have shut down, and they've been replaced by other kinds of retail. But there's a concept we use called the wheel of retailing that basically says, it's constantly changing, but over time you're going to see new forms replacing old forms. But again, there's nothing really new there. It's just a question of execution. So, for example, today, of course, we have access to a lot more technology that can make the in-store experience really, really something that those store designers didn't have in 1900. But they managed to do a pretty good job.
Right. Well, also, it's kind of rising expectations, right? The 1800 store shopper was blown away by a Ferris wheel that might be indoors, or a carousel. So the expectations have increased over time. So this revolutionary technology would certainly have been out of place and disorienting, decades or centuries ago. So I'm wondering, though, do you believe that it is required for that retail experience to have that level of interactivity? And do you see things coming in the future, whether it be augmented reality or something else, that might truly kind of re-energize the marketing and the selling and the retail experience as well?
I think the successful retailers are really raising the bar, because they are integrating a much more experiential element there. It doesn't have to be technology that does it. So for example, Casper mattresses is really succeeding because they're literally letting people take naps in their store. On they're letting them field test the mattresses. That's not technology based, but it's a great way of saying, hey, take our products and actually use them. And again, that's something a website can't do, at least that I know of today. So yeah, I mean, the augmented reality is something I've been very excited about for a number of years. I've done some work in that space, and the potential of that to really change the game is amazing. Although at this point, most retailers don't seem to be awake to that idea. When most people only heard of it after the Pokemon Go phenomenon, and this notion that there could be both a digital and a physical reality jumping around on your phone really was an eye-opener for a lot of people. But man, the potential for that, and you name the category, there's ways to make your products come alive that are absolutely astounding.
Right, you almost bring this idea of an arcade into the shopping experience, which could be revolutionary, right? And as technology makes that more seamless, I can think of a lot of applications where people go in for the experience of trying on some clothes or a different haircut. I mean, I'm just spitballing things here, but the idea is, I love it when technology enables entrepreneurs to create something that didn't exist before they had the enabling technology. But my experience is once one entrepreneur tries something, it feeds on itself, and other entrepreneurs then become excited about that idea, and then this technology gets more adoption and more robust applications.
It does. Of course, there's a bit of a Me Too to that, so there's definitely a novelty aspect to some of this stuff, especially virtual reality. But on the augmented reality side, it's more than just novelty, I'm convinced, because literally any physical space can become a billboard for your product. So, imagine, we've talked about the end of bookstores, for example. Imagine walking into a bookstore and every book cover, every time you put your phone up over the cover of the book on the shelf at Barnes & Noble, and that brings up the author telling you about how cool the book is, or even a cinematic version of one of the scenes in the book, or anything like that. So any kind of package can be a talking point for you, and some of it can be functional, like in the pharmacy department. You take your little pill bottle, and they have trouble getting people to take their prescriptions. You hold up your phone to it, and the doctor comes up out of the phone and explains to you all the things that you shouldn't be taking if you're taking this medication. It's you name the category, and I'm telling you, there's wonderful applications that are just waiting to be unleashed. And as you say, it's usually, there's usually a few brave first movers that take a chance on it, and then everybody else will jump on. So I'm really hoping that will be the case.
So I'm wondering, my engineer's telling me we're coming to the close of this interview, Dr. Sullivan. I'm wondering, did you learn, or what did you learn about, kind of consumer engagement and the postmodern consumer that you didn't know prior to writing and kind of researching and publishing your book?
Well, what it really reaffirmed to me that the consumer today is a different animal than he or she was not that long ago. And again, it boils down to that proactivity, and the reason I talk about postmodern consumers is what that basically means is that, in a postmodern world, the traditional boundaries don't really hold, and people love to mix and match experiences from all kinds of different places. So, think of it as one of these, these big buffet places that you go to, and you can have a pizza next to some egg rolls, next to a taco, all different kinds of ethnic food on the same plate. That's essentially what the consumer experience is today, and that's what people want. So companies that don't understand that are going to get left in the dust. What I mostly learned is, I think I can sum it up this way. You don't want to market to your customer. You want to market with your customer.
That's awesome. I would say let's end it on that, but I have two more things. One, how did you come about the title?
Well, it's kind of a play on some old, historical sayings about tearing down walls that some older readers will recognize.
Right.
But basically, it's a plea, literally, to tear down these walls, because really, marketers are their own worst enemies when it comes to making assumptions and stereotyping their customers, and especially not going out and actually interacting and, so to speak, fish where the fish are. So I say tear down these walls, because the business opportunities, and what I talk about in the book, are how many of the successful new products that are out today don't conform to traditional industry verticals. They're actually hybrids. various kinds. So, for example, the athleisure phenomenon, everybody walking around in these yoga pants and so on. That's a combination of athletic wear and leisure wear, and they literally created a new category by merging those two together and not being afraid of going beyond the wall. So that's where the opportunities are.
That, we save the best for last, but we're always looking for these teachable moments, and I think for marketers to think differently about how your brand is positioned and your product is positioned, and looking for these strange bedfellows, things that you can do that no one else in your industry is doing, gives you a chance to be a Lululemon and to kind of redefine what had traditionally been not even a consideration, but in the mind of a consumer, it's acceptable if it's marketed to them properly. So this was great, Dr. Sullivan. If someone wants to buy your book, Marketers, Tear Down These Walls, Liberating the Postmodern Consumer, how would they do that, sir?
They can go to Amazon and just type in Michael Solomon and the title, and that should come up. And they're welcome to come to my website as well, and drop me a note if they want to have a conversation. And that website is www.michaelsolomon.com. And either way, that'll work.
Thank you for sharing a bit about the great content that's in your book and the research that you've done. I really have enjoyed our time together today, sir. Thank you for being a friend of the program, and welcome to the Critical Mass community.
Well, thanks very much. I really enjoyed it.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye now.
All right, I'd also like to thank our engineer, none other than Mr. Paul Roberts, for a great job today, as well as our producers, without whom we could not do this show. Joan Park, Crystal Nunley, Haley Stern. If you'd like to connect with me, let's start on LinkedIn. I am Richard Franzi, Franzi. And until our next show, I hope all of your business decisions will move your company in a positive direction.
You have been listening to Critical Mass Radio Show Business Talk Show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. With your host, Richard Franzi.